2025 semester. Thank you all for attending today's presentation. My name is Adam Sizemore and I'll be the moderator for today's talk. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few comments. We are recording the session, which will be uploaded to YouTube later. If you have any questions, we'll save those for the end. And if you are here for a specific class, please sign in the back of the room before you leave. And I will communicate your attendance here with the respective faculty. So without further delay, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Greg Blair is an assistant professor of art and design. He currently holds a BFA in sculpture from the University of Lethbridge, an MFA in sculpture from the University of North Dakota, and a PhD in aesthetics and art theory from the Institute of Doctoral Studies in Visual Arts. His research interests include the politics of space, pop and punk culture, social criticism, and the recontextualization. His artistic production also regularly incorporates aspects of his scholarly writing, research such as body politics, alternative geographies, and the questioning of authority. Blair has exhibited his artwork and presented his research in over 30 different states, 5 Canadian provinces, and several international locations over the last 25 years. Excuse me. Blair's previously published books include Errant Bodies, Mobility and Political Resistance, and the Politics of Spatial Transgressions in the Arts. His writings have also been featured in Art Magazine, the Journal of Art of Life, Echo, a music-centered journal, Art Style Magazine, and Visual Inquiry. Blair has also had the good fortune to hang out with the Gorilla Girls for an entire day. Without further ado, I hand it over to you. I'm not sure what the Gorilla
Well, thank you everyone for coming to this little presentation this afternoon. My name is Greg Blair, and I'm going to talk to you about punk culture a little bit, specifically my relationship to punk culture and my experience in punk culture. So if you'll bear with me, I thought this is sort of how I dress on a regular basis while I'm teaching, but I thought since I'm talking about punk, I might need a little bit of a wardrobe modification, so just bear with me for a second. I'm going to get rid of this, because this is going to be a little more punk rock to show you that I have a low stage. And I have something else as well. Put this on. This just makes me feel a little more punk rock. So yeah, there we go. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, that's right. So I'm going to read a little bit, just some of the stuff in my presentation, just so I sort of stay on point. But before I get into that, I thought maybe I should give you a little background and a little context. And I think maybe I'll start with sort of what I would call my origin. If I was like superhero, this would be my origin story. This is my introduction to punk rock. This is how I came to discover and love punk rock. And it's probably clouded in forgotten elements, but I still remember very clearly, I believe I was 16 years old, and I came to my Catholic high school, and one of my friends that I think was a year older than I was, and he was kind of a skate punk, and I always thought he was really cool. And he came up to me before classes started, and he handed me this cassette tape. Ask your parents about it. A cassette tape, and said, "You have to listen to this. This is amazing. This will change your life." Well, that's a pretty big introduction, you know. I'm like, maybe I should skip school today and go listen to this. Like, it's going to change my life. But I went to school. But I remember coming home. I was excited. Ran off the bus. Got into my room. Opened my Sanyo boombox and popped that tape in there and pushed play, and I was fixated. And I just sat there and listened to the entire album, flipped it over, listened to the other side, the whole thing sitting on the edge of my bed. And then I did it again. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, I've never heard anything like this before. This is amazing. I want to be this. Whatever this is, I think I need to be involved with something like that. And that cassette happened to be an album called Damaged by a band known as Black Flag. And sometime later in my life, thinking back on this, I wanted to sort of, honor their presence and the way that they sort of got me hooked on punk rock music. So I tattooed the Black Flag logo on the back of my arm to serve as a constant reminder. So that's my introduction to punk rock. So fast forward, 25 years or so, and to give you a little background on the project that I'm going to talk to you about, I was presenting at a conference, I think in about 2017, and it was a panel that was gathering scholars together to talk about how their experience in punk culture helped them be really great art teachers. So it was very narrow and specific, but it was a really interesting panel. One of the other guys, it was at 8 a.m., and one of the other guys showed up with a 24-pack of beer and put it on the table, and I thought, very punk rock, but very early. And we had a great panel, was able to network with some of these other people, and we sort of finished and said, this was great, maybe we should do something more with this, and nothing really came of it. We sort of all went back to our own institutions and kind of forgot about it, and I would see these people every once in a while at other conferences, sort of how it happens within your field of scholarship. But then I decided, I'd been thinking about punk and I've slowly been incorporating it more into my research. In my very first book, I wrote a chapter entirely about Black Flag and compared them to the ancient Greek cynics like Diogenes and others. And I was really happy with that, but I thought, this just doesn't feel enough. I think I need to push this further and do something a little bit more, more of a really in-depth engagement with punk culture. So I started thinking about doing that, and I had a meeting with my tenure committee, and they were asking me about, as you work towards tenure, what are some of the research goals that you have? And one of them asked me, something like, are you ever going to write another book or what? And I thought, I was like, yeah, they're a pain in the ass, but they are fun. And that question, though, spurred me into thinking about doing that. And I thought, maybe it is time. I've forgotten all of the bad things, and I just remember the awesome things, and maybe I should look into that idea. So I started thinking about it, and I thought, I think it's time. I want to write a book about punk. I feel like I sort of owe punk my life in a lot of ways, and I think there's some interesting scholarship that still has not been done about punk culture. So I decided, I started kind of getting an idea together, and I thought, what if we did sort of take what happened with that panel, but expand and explode upon it. So I thought, what if I did a book about, and got a bunch of people to help me, and did a book about the lessons that people learned from punk. Maybe we could call it What Punk Taught Me. So, and then people could tell us stories about this is what punk taught me. I was a punk in my youth, and this is how I use that in my current life. So I thought, okay, I think I have something, but I need help. I can't do this all by myself. I've done that before, and it's a different animal, but I reached back to one of the people that was on that original panel back in 2017. And I should tell you, this is the fall of 2022 by this point. So it's about 5 years later. And so I reached out to him, and you sort of knew him just a little bit, but I reached out and emailed him and said, hey, you probably don't remember me, but this is who I am. I have this crazy idea. We should make this book about punk. Do you want to help? And I waited. I'm like, what's going to happen? So he emailed back, he's like, of course, absolutely, let's do this. So I knew I had at least one other person on board. So him and I started talking about this, what is this project exactly going to look like? And we decided, we wanted it to be sort of an anthology where people could share their stories that they have about their punk experiences and how it's influenced them in whichever way that it has. So we started gathering people, and this was a process of networking. Some of these people that are appearing in the book, I do know them, maybe just sort of tangentially, like I met them through another person. Other people, I completely just cold called, like just put myself out there. And I was like, they are either gonna think this is a great idea, or I'm gonna get my email deleted immediately. And some of the people that replied, I was like, really? You want to be a part of this? Like, I'm nobody. You don't know me. But we got some great people to sign on. Like, I'm amazed at some of the contributors that we have. Like people like Liz Worth, who's known for writing this seminal book on the history of punk rock in Canada. Like, she wrote that book, and she's like, yeah, I would love to submit a chapter. That'd be great. So that's kind of the background of the project that I'm going to talk to you about today. So we really seriously started working on this probably in January of 2023. And for those of you, if you've ever written a book before, it just takes time. It's just the nature of working with a publisher and working through the process. So the book is still not published. What is it? Almost April 2025. It's been over 2 years. But we are on the precipice. I'm going to show we have a cover with names on it and stuff. So I'm going to share some of that with you, but we are like right on the doorstep. We are on the final, we're doing the final proofing right now. So, you know, I keep trying to tell my contributors, you know, it'll be out in 2025. I'm hopeful in the next couple of months or so, but it's going to happen. We've gone this far, and we're not giving up at this point. So what I thought I would maybe do to start with is actually just read you the abstract for that. So there's the cover that we were able to come up with. We worked with a graphic designer. But I thought I would just read you the abstract for the book so that you kind of get an overall sense of like this, you know, in a formal way, what is this book all about? And to do that, I'm going to just read you the abstract, and I'm probably going to do the most punk rock thing that I'm going to do all day today. I have to put my readers on. I'm sorry for that, but I need them because this type is small. So this is what our book is all about. From personal anecdotes to philosophical inquiries, What Punk Taught Me gathers essays from 15 different contributors whose lives have all been touched upon by punk culture in some meaningful way. And I'll show you the rest. This is the back cover. Many years after hearing their first blast of distorted punk guitar as a youth or teenager, these individuals, like so many others, have come to realize later in life that their experience of punk has provided them with an incredibly valuable tutelage in becoming an artist, or a writer, or an educator, or even overall human being. For these contributors, the experience of punk has been the source of community and ethics, philosophy and aesthetics, or even an attitude and identity. This anthology explores how various individuals have connected with punk in a variety of distinctive ways, perhaps through music or venues, fashion, art, writing, activism, collecting culture, rebellion, subversion, or DIY projects. These essays document the lessons of punk, bringing together people from a wide array of backgrounds. Each of them shares their own unique story of what punk has taught them, how those experiences have been formative in their lives, and how punk has supported their personal and professional development. These narratives serve as a reflection on the myriad influence of punk as a methodology, a philosophy, an ontology, an aesthetic, a strategy, a cultural phenomenon, or a worldview. The culmination of this collection provides a deeper understanding of the individualized and personal influence of punk, but also the wider arch and overall legacy of punk culture. Through this analysis, an explicit correlation is drawn between the world of punk, the educations it provides, and the ripples of its wider sociocultural impact. So that's what our book is all about. The next thing that I would maybe want to read to you is, so the way that we decided to start the book, and this is something that I do even when I teach, I like to define the terms that we're dealing with. So in the introduction that I wrote, I thought if we're going to write a book about punk, we maybe better talk a little bit about what punk is. So that's sort of where the introduction dives into, like what is, like the section title is, what is punk anyway? And so I want to read you a little bit more. It sort of like gives you an introduction to that. It expands into about a 20-page analysis, but I don't want to read all of that. But I want to give you a little bit of sense of where what are we thinking about in terms of this word punk, and how are we hoping that these different contributors might define it for themselves. So let me read you just a little bit more. So the introduction starts, what is punk anyway? And this is what I wrote. In some ways, it seems that punk is sublime. Almost like something just beyond the limits of what language, critique, taxonomy, or maybe even a story told in a dingy bathroom of a punk show can fully and accurately capture or define. Perhaps the explanation or essence of punk is actually ineffable, something abstruse, buried deep within the realm of the metaphysical. The musician and music writer Bob Stanley once referenced this enigmatic ambiguity of punk when he wrote this. Oh, I'm going to come back to this. When he wrote this, he said, ask 40 punk rockers how they define punk, and you'll get 40 different answers, and they'll all be correct. So, punk is difficult to define, but we decided to sort of embrace that. And the introduction continues on a little bit more, and this is sort of how it wraps up. So there's some meat that I'm taking out of the middle, and I'm just giving you the beginning and the end. So this is how it sort of comes to a conclusion. Yet the seemingly indefinability of punk is not a detriment. Rather, it offers the ability for self-definition of the sort that is explored in this anthology. Each contributor to the anthology describes their own unique punk narrative and what they have learned from those experiences that have stayed with them throughout their entire lives. The goal of this anthology is certainly not aimed at finding a definition for punk. Rather, this collection of stories aims to expand the thinking and scholarship about punk, beyond mohawks and safety pins, to demonstrate how punk provides a plethora of lessons to those who have been influenced by it in ways that range from aesthetics and ethics to community and collecting. Each of the contributors to this volume have been invited to share their own unique interpretation and engagement with punk. These writings range from anecdotal reflective journal entries to methodical critical analysis to philosophical inquiry and everything in between. Yet each of them shares an intimacy and personal connection to punk culture, and we want to thank these contributors for their openness, their courage, and their willingness to share their story. Some of them are kind of sad. This anthology would not be possible without their tremendous efforts. The intended audience for this book is anyone interested in punk culture, punk history, music history, punk aesthetics, American and Canadian history, cultural anthropology, and even the philosophies of punk. So that's our book. This is sort of the overall view of it. And what I think I'm going to end my presentation with is a focus on the chapter that I contributed, because it's sort of my story and what the kind of things that I have learned from punk. So the chapter that I'm going to talk to you about, I decided to title Doing It Wrong, Necessary Transgressions. So my own experience of the impact of punk really grew out of the specifics of the local Central Alberta punk scene that I immersed myself in as a late teen and early 20-something. So that is the Central Alberta punk scene I just referenced. Each person's experience of punk is undoubtedly tied to to the distinctiveness of the localized street level community that they're a part of. And because of our relative isolation from larger Canadian and US metro areas, my friends and I did not necessarily get a chance to see the biggest punk acts of the day in person during the early to late 90s. I do know that Nirvana played a single show in both Calgary and Edmonton in early 1991, but if you know your history, that was a full 6 months before they released Nevermind and went on to become household names as the grunge movement exploded. My friends and I did attend a Rancid punk show at the University of Alberta in 1995, which was about the most famous punk band that I had ever seen to date. I did finally get to see Bad Religion live in concert in 1999 when they played at the Max Bell Arena in Calgary, but with a capacity of 3,000 people, it felt a lot more like a stadium rock concert than the intimate and sweaty kind of punk shows that I like to go to. Instead of the bigger selling and more notorious bands on the SST or Epitaph labels, or acts like the Dead Kennedys or Fugazi, our punk scene was made up mostly of local and West Coast Canadian punk bands that included people like this. Bands like Field Day, Wagbeard, The Smalls, SNFU, I'm going to talk about them later. Dayglow Abortions, Gob, Huevos Rancheros, Chicks Dig It, and so many others. Because these bands were all fairly local, we were able to see them perform on a regular basis, which provided a sense of familiarity and close-knit community, especially amongst the punks in my hometown of Red Deer. If you can't see it, there it is. With this sense of community that I had, it certainly nourished the development of my social and emotional growth at a time when many young people are confused. I know that I was still figuring out who I wanted to be when I started being a member of this punk culture, but it was the atmosphere of rebellion, freedom from societal conventions, and the encouragement to be transgressive and to challenge rules that would leave its most enduring and indelible impression. It was within this sphere of influence of punk that I first learned about how breaking the rules could actually lead to something productive, creative, maybe even beautiful. This, of course, ran counter to the narratives that had been foisted upon me by school, church, and society. The underlying thinly veiled message of my Catholic school upbringing was one of obedience and to never question any authority or tradition. My experience in my little corner of the punk world taught me that it's okay to do things wrong, and sometimes transgressions are necessary to move things forward or in another direction. So what would these maybe look like, doing these things wrong? These are some examples of how the punks that I hung around with didn't always do things the way you were supposed to. And one of them included clothing. A lot of them would wear clothing in a way that would have been deemed unacceptable by the mainstream. Several of the local punks that I hung around with would adorn their clothing with items purchased from the hardware store. For example, I would often wear shower rings looped through the buttonholes of my jean jacket. I have no idea why. It looked different. Many of my associates dressed in a way that would likely be seen as unsavory, dirty, or degenerate by mainstream society. Yet my close knowledge of these people and their character proved that they were anything but those things. Many of the punks in my circle also did not behave how we were told we were supposed to, especially in public settings. Many of them were often loud, provocative, offensive, but at the same time loving and loyal, tender human beings. I'm going to take a sip. Over time, as I grew closer with many of my punk friends, the clear-cut dichotomy of good versus evil that had been perpetuated throughout my life from religion and general cultural attitudes was starting to dissolve before my very eyes. I learned fairly quickly that human beings are more complex than a simple binary. I also love that many of the people in my punk circle did not ask for permission or wait for approval to do the things they were passionate about. For some people, this may be considered doing things the wrong way, but we believe that if you wanted to do something, you should just go out and do it. What is stopping you? This DIY philosophy was likely a trickle-down from Tony Moon's now infamous drawing in the first issue of Sideburns magazine. And he declared, this is a chord, this is another, this is a third. Now form a band. What are you waiting for? In 1995, a group of 3 of us decided to listen to Tony Moon, and we did just that. Only one of us really knew how to play an instrument or sing. It wasn't me. And so by de facto, he became the lead guitarist and singer. I decided to try drums. I thought that was probably the easiest to learn. And my girlfriend picked up the bass guitar. In full disclosure, we were pretty horrible. But we had a lot of fun, and we passionately practiced as much as we could. It was really more about camaraderie and creating something together. There's no better feeling in the world than when you're just jamming along with your friends and everything just clicks. Each of you is in sync in a way that just feels right. The music comes flowing out of you almost effortlessly. Our band even decided to record an open air record some of our songs, which were mostly covers. And we did this on a cassette tape on my small Sanyo boombox, the same one that I listened to the album on, in a garden shed without any actual microphones. To deem the sound quality as lo-fi, that's likely overly generous and a suspect claim. It made me think about if there is something perhaps lower quality than lo-fi. I think that's what it would be. The cassette recording, however, was something that we did together. And today I'm glad to have a small record of that time in my life with those specific people. To complete the recording for distribution, I drew a simple little cover design, and we made copies that were mostly given away for free to our other punk friends. And here's my little job. The thinking that most of us had about making music also applied to our philosophy about art making as well. Even though many of us were already attending art school, we still truly believed that if anyone wanted to become a painter or a sculptor, they should just do it. What are you waiting for? Get painting now. Go do it. There was an energy in our group that seemed boundless and ripe with possibility. Nearly everyone in my circle of friends created zines and comics, both individually and sometimes working collaboratively together. And this is an example of one of those. After creating these for several years, I remember one of my good friends saying to me that he wanted to start his own publishing company. And I told him, yeah, that's a great idea, you should do that. And I saw him later that week and he said he did it. It was done. I was like, oh, great. For us, it was mostly just a matter of making the decision to do something. He ended up DIY publishing many of his own comics and zines, but he also published a lot of stuff for other people from within our artistic punk circles. So he did start his own publishing company. As a collective experience, I can now reflect on almost 30 years later, crazy to say. I realize each of these examples of doing things wrong that I've mentioned are examples of productive transgressive behaviors. By using this term transgressive, I'm referring to the idea of transgression that I've written about before, in which it becomes an adaptable and constructed method of seeking new knowledge. I now look back on my punk experience and appreciate that punk taught me a certain type of transgressive philosophy, or maybe to put in a better way, a type of transgressive philosophizing. This type of philosophizing that I took from punk is like the one I discovered so many years later in the writings of José Ortega y Gasset. in which the critical role of philosophy is to question long-held beliefs. I can also see now how punk taught me a type of transgression that crosses established behavioral and cultural codified boundaries of right or wrong. Similar to how Bell Hooks designated her form of radical feminist pedagogy as a means to teach transgression, punk taught me to transgress in a way that is wonderfully beneficial. The transgressiveness I learned from punk was framed as something constructive because, as Hooks has also stated, transgression allows one to cross boundaries to take another look, to contest, to interrogate, and in some cases to recover and redeem. With critical distance and self-reflection, I realized that my punk experience gave me the permission and blessing to swim against the stream, to go against the grain, and see the positive outcomes of breaking from the status quo. Let me go back to Ortega for a minute, because his process of philosophizing greatly mirrors my own punk experience. In his text, What is Philosophy?, Ortega describes his approach to philosophy as one that descends boldly below what each one customarily thinks life is really about. And by doing so, it allows us to discover the pure being of our being. I think that's what punk gave me. In parallel terms, the philosophy of punk enabled me to begin an ontological journey of self-discovery. It gave me the courage not to shrink from self-expression or hide my true self for fear of ridicule or being made fun of, which most of you know is a very serious concern for teenagers. Punk told me that it was okay to be different, that you didn't need to work so hard to fit in. I have a discrete memory from a face-to-face punk show. Face-to-Face is a punk band. Sometime around 1996, something like that. And I saw this kid, and I was still a kid too, so I feel comfortable calling him a kid. But I saw this kid in the middle of the punk show. He climbs up on stage, he literally tears his shirt off, and he just starts wriggling his body in pure ecstatic abandon. And the crowd went crazy. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, that's amazing. He doesn't care at all what anybody else thinks, and he's just simply immersing and losing himself in that moment of self-expression and enjoyment of the music. It felt like a liberating antithesis to the culture at my high school, in which the most popular kids and teachers promoted conformity, assimilation, a certain type of normativity that never really fully aligned with my own consciousness or worldview. And now I saw this kid doing something different. Ortega also claims that philosophizing should be a process in which you do not seek to be convinced by what you are going to hear and what you are told. Do not take this so seriously, he states, but treat it like a game. What Ortega seems to inspire is thinking for oneself, rather than allowing yourself to be spoon-fed information. I felt this same type of reassurance from my punk experience and community, and now later in life, I try to pass on a similar attitude to my students. I tell them all the time to question what they are being taught, as a means to increase comprehension and knowledge. I find that students are sometimes afraid to question new information they have learned and take it at face value because it came from a book or somebody standing at the front of a classroom. But I try to remind them that ideas change, and as Ortega has written, yesterday's truth is today's error, and by that same token, today's truth will not be serviceable tomorrow. My hope is that I can perhaps pass along to my students just a little bit of upper lip punk sneer, like this. And I want to pause here right now and get everyone to try their best upper level punk sneer. And the bass player for the Sex Pistols, Sid Vicious, I think was probably one of the best punk sneers in history. But I want you to try right now to do your upper level punk sneer. And this is something that you can practice in the mirror. It has wide application. throughout your life. Anytime you feel like you disagree with some sort of authority figure, except if you're meeting with the dean, you feel free to use this upper lip punk sneer at any time. Let me come back to this. I mixed my pages up. Sorry. Okay, I'm just gonna have to go for it. Oh no, here's my page. Oh yeah, I got it. So that's how I sort of feel like, reading Ortega later in my life, I'm reading these things and going, I've heard this before. Like I've encountered these ideas before. And I realized it was in my punk experience when I was a teenager. Another instance of this happened when I started reading the work of Bell Hooks. And throughout her career in life, Bell Hooks often returned to the concept of transgression as a way to know beyond the boundaries of what is acceptable. She has written extensively about transgression in texts such as Outlaw Culture, Resisting Representations, and Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom. After reading these books, I was struck by an appreciation for how punk had also taught me to transgress, much in the same way that Hooks was encouraging her students to do so. For Hooks and my punk education, transgression at a foundational level is a means of resistance that is best described, I think, by Chandra Mohanty. And this is how she describes it. It is a resistance that lies in self-conscious engagement with dominant normative discourses and representations, and in the active creation of oppositional, analytic, and cultural spaces. Through my punk involvement in education, I witnessed and experienced untraditional kinds of love, community, respect, and loyalty that were writ large different from what I had been taught by my school, church, and society. And that difference was not negative or abhorrent. It was uplifting. It was encouraging. Being taught to transgress is really a form of critical thinking and individual agency, one that is focused on creating a new language, rupturing disciplinary boundaries, and decentering authority. This type of critical thinking is ideally suited to create a possibility for change, especially for those feeling burdened by societal instruments of oppression. In his writings, Giorgio Agamben, among others, has reinvigorated the notions of agency and individual subjectivity in creating change. For example, in his extension of the Foucauldian analysis of apparatuses, Agamben identifies and investigates their effect on the subject. For Agamben, an apparatus is anything that captures, restricts, or predetermines the thoughts and actions of living beings. In a departure from Foucault, however, Agamben advocates finding new ways to dismantle them through individual agency, and indeed points out that this problem of reclaiming the desubjective power of an apparatus cannot properly be raised as long as those who are concerned with it are unable to intervene in their own process of subjectification. Agamben asserts that the subject in their own critical thinking plays a role in the production of each person's own subjectivity. What Agamben is describing here is akin to Bell Hooks' teaching to transgress. And it's also one of the main lessons I attempt to pass on to my students. This transgressive process is described by Hooks in a classroom setting as going into a college or a university with the will to share the desire to encourage excitement. Such an interesting phrasing. Both Hooks and I have found this to be transgressive by approaching teaching in this manner, because it goes against the apathy and reverence of the sage on the stage that is part of so many classroom settings. I also take these lessons from punk and apply them to teaching students about how to find their own writing voices. Learning to write is not always a day at the beach, right, Casey?
It's not.
Right? It's not. But it is something that has tremendous value, and it can be very rewarding. And as an entry point into the fulfilling and gratifying parts of writing, I really challenge my burgeoning student writers to find their own distinctive writing style, tone, and personality. I don't want them to write in a way that they think academic writing should be. I want them to be creative and radical with their writing. I want them to be bold and exceptional. Maybe even break some rules along the way if that creates a better outcome in the long term. Some educators that I have encountered have accused me of pandering to the students by doing this, or falling victim to just another form of grade inflation. But it seems to me that many of these educators seem to advocate for an unchanged Platonic ideal of how to teach history and writing. After all, what worked 15, 25 years ago, it was good enough for most of us, wasn't it? Do we really need something different? I know there will always be a place for knowing the rules of a proper manual of style. I don't want to get rid of that. But I also want to make a case that teaching practices need to be punk. They should evolve and adapt over time so that they are effectively helping students find their own writing identities. So these students can become the next generation of historians, critics, curators, plumbers, poets, philosophers, or punks. I think one of my main goals as a professor is to foster an environment in my classroom similar to what I experienced as a punk. The punk community that I was a part of in Red Deer, my hometown, in the early to late 1990s was exciting because there was a sense of communal support that encouraged sharing with and assisting one another. Within this community, we also pushed each other to challenge conventions and question authority. Backed by this support system, we pitched in and helped each other when one person came to the group with an exciting idea. Often we would find ourselves hanging out in small groups and discussing these wild ideas, chain-smoking cigarettes into the wee hours of the morning until we felt like we had developed a solid plan. One such example is when a friend of mine had an idea for a group art exhibition of all the artists within our circle of friends. We all loved the idea, let's do an exhibition, but we had no budget, no venue, and no idea at all about how to make this happen. So should we just give up? We know nothing. Most of us were 19 years old. But we were resilient, and we decided slowly, surely we can make this happen. Let's work together. And eventually it did. My friend Tim, I don't know how he did this, but he found a venue, and it was kind of like a sizable vacant space on the second floor of a very rundown commercial building in the heart of the downtown area. Sounds perfect to me. And I don't know how he did it, and I can't remember all the details, but somehow he talked the owner into letting us use this space for an art exhibition for a few weeks. And we wouldn't be charged any rent or any kind of fees. All that he asked us to do was tidy the space up a little bit. And so we all came together, and we painted walls, installed the exhibition, and arranged an opening. It wasn't the most professional exhibition or necessarily the best exhibition space, but the fact was that we decided we wanted to make this happen, and we worked as a collective towards its realization, and that was the most important thing. These types of lessons from my punk experience have stayed with me, and I try to encourage my students to have similar attitudes. If you want to try something new, find a few people willing to help you along the way, and go out and do it. Go do it for yourself. In Teaching to Transgress, Bell Hooks also describes a moment in her life when she had all the motivation, the willingness, even the agency to be transgressive, especially in her teaching. But she didn't know how to express what she wanted to do. And as she writes, I had lived through the struggle for racial desegregation and was in resistance without having a political language to articulate that process. And she says, Paulo, she's referring to Paulo Freire, Paulo was one of the thinkers whose work gave me a language. In turn, as my career has developed, Hooks has also helped give me the language to be and to communicate transgression. But before bell hooks came into my life, there was punk. Punk helped me to understand how to be transgressive and how doing something wrong is sometimes really the best way to do it. One of the final things that punk gave me, which creates a close connection between the ethos and philosophy of my punk experience and the theories of transgression described by bell hooks, was an open, safe space. This was a space of freedom to explore and discover who I was going to become. Hooks designates this type of space as radical openness, where one can grow without limits. Well, there's something similar in punk. Legs McNeil, one of the early New York Bowery punk scribes, he's written that early punk was really about real freedom and personal freedom. That sounds like the open space of Hooks to me. At the same time, I also know that not everyone involved with punk has been afforded the same experience of openness and nonconformity that I did. I also recognize that the support and kinship I experienced was not necessarily felt by all. I have certainly encountered my fair share of punk gatekeepers that tried to ostracize and prohibit specific individuals from being part of our circle, or would even police and chastise others for not being punk enough. Within my smaller crowd of friends, however, we did not buy into that mentality. We held the belief that punk was not about wearing the right clothes, or going to the right shows, or even listening to the right bands. Many of these issues with punk and the exclusionary tactics of some of its followers are very well documented in the introductory essay of this book, so we deal with it at the very beginning. Within our circle, it seemed more about finding your own way and having a support system that could provide thoughtful discourse, helpful critique, or even lend a helping hand. As sort of my final note, as I enter into kind of my conclusion here, my final note about the kind of community based in mutual respect that I found in punk, I want to tell you an anecdote and describe an experience that I had at a small SNFU show that I attended sometime in the late 1990s. This is probably like 1996, 1997, this SNFU show. And if you're not familiar, this punk band, SNFU, is borrowing this term, SNFU, from the military. It's a military term, which means situation normal fucked up, right? So the band was really good that night. It was a really great show. The pit was great. It was a perfect combination of sweat and aggression, not too much violence, just like the right amount of violence. Towards the end of the show, their lead singer, Mr. Cheapig, he briefly, I'll show you. Oh, there's SNFU performing. So their lead singer that you can see here, his name is Mr. Cheapig. Towards the end of the show, so you can tell they're getting ready to wrap things up, and he briefly leaves the stage, and he comes back onto the stage wearing a black garbage bag as a poncho with holes cut out for his head and for his arms. And he comes right up to the front of the stage and approaches the microphone, and he tells us that since he's been spitting on us all night long, it was now our turn. And with arms spread wide like a punk rock Jesus, he stepped forward and encouraged and cajoled everyone in the audience to spit on him. Full disclosure, I didn't do it. I was like, no, I'm watching that. I'm not going to. By the time everyone was through, the garbage bag was thoroughly covered with dripping gobs of saliva and who knows what else. While this act might seem utterly disgusting, extremely unhygienic, it also points to the power dynamic and mutual respect of the level playing field that I encountered as a punk. Mr. Cheapig showed me that no one person was deemed better or superior to another, even if they were the one up on stage with the microphone in their hand. So I want to say thank you and rest in peace to Kendall Stephen Chin, also known as Mr. Cheaphead. He passed away in 2020. The incredibly valuable insights I have chronicled here as part of my punk experience, coupled with the notable emphasis on a DIY attitude, has become vital to my understanding of necessary and needed transgression, which in turn have informed me as to how to live as an artist, an educator, an activist, and even a human being. To sort of like, what part of my conclusion, I kind of want to send like this thank you out into the world. I know they will never hear this, but in some ways I hope that they feel it. And I want to say thank you to many of the Western Canadian punk bands that played shows during my formative years, either in or near my hometown, and for providing opportunities for young punks like me to gather, to network, bond and discover, and even just have a cathartic release of energy. I want to list them here by name, knowing that I'm most likely going to accidentally make an omission, because fading memories in internet searches can only take you so far. So for any omission, I apologize. But here are some of the bands that were so formative to me in no particular order. Field Day, Wagbeard, The Smalls, DOA, SNFU, Mao, the Hanson Brothers, Gob, Champion Alberta, the Studebakers, Huevos Rancheros, Chicks Dig It, Propagandy, Belvedere, Choke, Dayglow Abortions, Wheat Chiefs, and finally my very own first punk band, No Skids. On the very final note, though, I want to thank all of my students. They help me feel a little bit like a punk every single day, because we get to make breakthroughs that we told were not possible. We create innovative visual solutions, and that feels pretty punk to me. So I want to thank them. And that's the end of my presentation, but I want to finish with just one thing, because I thought this would maybe be the most fitting way to do this. So I have a prop that I brought along that I need to and I've been sort of spitting on you for the last hour or so, so I thought it's now turn for, oh wait, no, I'm just kidding. So thanks for coming. Thanks for This is what he looked like, though. This is what he was wearing.
Now we'll open the floor up for questions, if anybody has any. Hand it back over to you.
Say to me?
Yeah.
I saw SNFU in the early 90s, by the way. But
Oh, awesome.
I think that's what they show. But yeah, I was like thinking, you were talking about like